My name is Henry Driscoll, and I was present when something ordinary stopped being treated that way. That's the part people misunderstand about classification. They imagine a dramatic moment, men in suits, stamped folders, raised voices. But what I remember most clearly is how quiet it was, how normal the room felt when the decision was made, how easily the truth slid from one category into another without anyone objecting out loud. It was 1988, late summer, the kind of heat that presses the forest flat and makes every sound feel deliberate. I'd been with the service long enough to know when a day was supposed to stay routine. That one didn't. The incident started as a welfare check. A ranger had missed 2 check-ins along a backcountry patrol loop. No mayday, no distress code, just silence where there should have been a voice. It happened often enough to have a procedure: drive out, check the truck, expand if necessary. I was assigned to accompany the response because I knew the terrain. Paper maps, folded and refolded until the creases felt like memory lines. We took an older truck, the kind that rattled even at idle. The radio crackled constantly, not interference exactly, more like something testing the line. We found the truck just before dusk, parked neatly off the service road, engine cold, key still in the ignition, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. It looked staged, though I didn't have a word for that yet. The forest around it was wrong in a way that took time to register. No insects, no wind in the canopy. The air felt held. I logged what I could: time, location, condition, everything by procedure. That was before the folder changed color. Back at the station, the report moved fast, too fast. Normally, paperwork lingered. This didn't. Within hours, supervisors I didn't recognize were reviewing my notes. They asked specific questions, not about what we found, but about what I noticed. Sounds, gaps, anything that didn't fit cleanly. I answered carefully. That was my second mistake. The meeting happened the next morning. Small room, no windows, a table that still had old coffee rings etched into the surface. My report sat in the center, now clipped inside a manila folder that hadn't been there before. Midway through the discussion, someone replaced it. No announcement, no explanation. They slid the old folder away and set down a new one, thicker, heavier, a darker shade of yellow. I remember thinking it looked wrong, too official, like it belonged to a different kind of incident. That classification is premature, one ranger said quietly. No one acknowledged him. Instead, one of the men I didn't know cleared his throat and said, "From this point forward, this is not an active case. It's a contained matter." Contained. I asked what that meant. He looked at me like I'd asked something impolite. "It means we're adjusting how it's documented." "What about the missing ranger?" Another pause, longer this time. "He won't be listed as missing." That was the moment I realized what classification really did. It didn't lock things away. It redefined them until they no longer needed resolution. After that, details started to blur, not because I forgot them, but because they were overwritten. Maps were updated, patrol routes rerouted. The area where we found the truck was labeled differently by the end of the week. Not closed, not restricted, just simplified. The radio traffic changed too. Certain frequencies went quiet at specific times of day. Others stayed active longer than they should have. No one explained why. I started keeping my own notes. Nothing dramatic, just observations. Times when the forest felt too attentive. Moments when distance didn't behave the way it should. I kept them in a small logbook I didn't file. That was my third mistake. 2 days later, a colleague pulled me aside near the maintenance shed. He'd been there longer than me, seen more. "You were in the room," he said. "Yes." "They shouldn't have let that happen." "Let what happen?" He lowered his voice. "Witnesses make classification unstable." That night I dreamed of the truck again. Same position, same stillness. But in the dream, the forest had moved closer, trees tighter, space reduced, like the environment was correcting something out of place. I woke up to the sound of my radio clicking on. No voice, just a tone, acknowledgement. I shut it off and didn't turn it back on until morning. By the end of the week, the incident had a code, then a reference number, then a disclaimer attached to it that I was asked to sign. Not a non-disclosure agreement exactly, more like an acknowledgement that what I remembered wasn't reliable anymore. I didn't sign. They didn't press me. They didn't have to. Because once something is classified, it stops belonging to the people who were there. It becomes a shape the system can move around, and anyone who remembers the original outline becomes a liability, not for what they know, but for what they can't unknow. I stayed on. I did my job. I learned when to stop asking questions, but I never forgot the moment the folder changed color, the exact second when an incident crossed from reality into something else. Something safer. Something quieter. Something that didn't need witnesses. After the classification, the park went back to sounding like a park. That's the part that stays with me, the speed of the return to normal. Radios chirped with routine traffic. Maintenance requests stacked up. Visitors complained about trail closures that no longer existed on the map. If you hadn't been in that room when the folder changed color, you would have thought nothing had happened at all. But for those of us who had been there, the silence wasn't empty. It was managed. The missing ranger's name stopped appearing on duty rosters. His locker was cleared by the end of the week, not ceremoniously, efficiently, like a desk being reassigned after a transfer. I watched it happen from across the hall, the way you watch something you know you're not supposed to comment on. I tried to ask once, just once. "What's his status?" I said to a supervisor while we were both pretending to read the same bulletin board. He didn't look up, resolved. "That's not a status." He finally met my eyes. "It is when there's nothing left to resolve." That answer carried weight. It meant the search was over, not because it had succeeded, but because it had been redefined out of existence. I started noticing how language shifted after that. Words like lost and missing vanished from conversation. They were replaced by softer terms: unavailable, inactive, reassigned. The forest itself hadn't changed, but the way we described it had. And description, I learned, was everything. A week after the incident, I was sent back to the same sector, officially for trail assessment. Unofficially, I think they wanted to see how I behaved. I went alone. Paper map, compass, vintage flashlight, radio clipped to my belt, volume turned low. The trail looked normal at first. Familiar bends, recognizable landmarks. But the farther I walked, the more the space between things felt inconsistent. A fallen log that should have been 20 paces away arrived in 10. A ridge that normally took half an hour to reach appeared in minutes. I checked my watch twice, convinced it had stopped. It hadn't. The forest was doing something subtle, not bending rules, just applying them differently, like it was smoothing over an error. I reached the spot where we'd found the truck. There was nothing there. No tire marks, no disturbed soil, not even the faint indentation where the vehicle's weight should have pressed into the ground. The clearing was gone too, replaced by a dense stand of young trees that couldn't have grown that fast, not by any measure I trusted. I felt that pressure again, not fear, attention. The radio clicked. I didn't answer. "Henry," a voice said. Not urgent, not threatening, familiar enough to feel wrong. "You shouldn't be here," it continued. I froze. Who is this? A pause filled with a soft structural sound, wood shifting maybe, or something deeper settling. "You were present," the voice said. "That made you part of the process." "What process?" Another pause, longer. "Correction," it replied. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing needed to. "What happened to him?" I asked. I don't know why I did. Curiosity, guilt, some need to anchor the conversation to a human question. The voice didn't answer directly. "He stayed when the environment changed," it said. "That's not survivable in the long term." My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied, like a warning that didn't need repeating. "Why classify it?" I asked. "Because naming a boundary creates pressure," the voice said. "Pressure leads to crossings." The radio went silent. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to reconcile what I'd heard with what I was allowed to remember. When I finally turned back, the path behind me looked flatter, simpler, like it had been redrawn to remove complexity. Back at the station, my personal logbook was gone. Not taken from my locker, not confiscated, just absent as if it had never been there at all. In its place sat an official incident summary, thin, sanitized, stamped with the new classification code. I recognized my handwriting in it. That was the moment I understood how deep the rewriting went. They didn't erase you. They replaced you, version by version, until the original no longer mattered. I was called into another meeting 2 days later. Same room, same table, fewer people. One of the unfamiliar men slid a document toward me. "This acknowledges your understanding of the reclassification." "I already understand it," I said. "Understanding and acknowledgement aren't the same," he replied. "What happens if I don't sign?" He considered that, not hang immediate. "And later." A faint smile. "Memory becomes unreliable." I didn't sign. They let me walk out anyway. From that point on, my career continued, but on a narrower track. Fewer field assignments, more administrative work, a gentle drift away from places where the forest felt attentive. I learned to listen without responding, to log what was expected and forget the rest, to treat certain silences as instructions. But some nights, usually just before sleep, I'd hear that tone again in my head, the one from the radio. Not a sound so much as a pause, like the world waiting to see if I'd say something out loud. I never did. Because by then, I understood the real purpose of classification. It wasn't to hide what happened. It was to make sure it never happened the same way again. And anyone who remembered the original version became a variable the system didn't like to keep around for long. I carried that knowledge quietly for the rest of my career, like a stone you learn to keep balanced in your pocket so it doesn't tear the fabric. After the second meeting, no one mentioned the incident again. Not to me, not around me. And yet, everything about my job shifted. Patrol assignments stayed close to main trails. My radio was replaced twice in 6 months. New maps arrived more frequently than usual, each one cleaner than the last, each revision sanding down details I remembered being there. The forest itself didn't feel angry. That's important to say. It felt satisfied, as if something had gone out of alignment and had since been corrected, and now it expected us to behave accordingly. The missing ranger's name faded completely. not just from records but from conversation. I tried once, just once, to say it out loud in the break room. The sound felt wrong in my mouth, like using a word that no longer belonged to the language. No one responded, not even to ask who I meant. That was when I understood the final stage of classification. It doesn't end with documents. It ends when the people who remember stop reinforcing each other's memories, when isolation does the rest of the work. In the early 90s, I was asked to help train new hires. Orientation again. Same binders, same procedures, same omissions. I stood at the back of the room watching fresh faces nod along, unaware of what was being left out. One of them raised his hand. What happens if a ranger misses multiple check-ins without a distress call? The instructor smiled. That's extremely rare. I felt that pressure behind my eyes again. That old, familiar sensation. After class, I pulled the kid aside. I wanted to warn him, not directly, just enough to make him cautious. Trust your radio, I said, but don't answer everything. He laughed, assuming it was a joke. I didn't correct him, because by then I knew the risk of saying too much wasn't immediate punishment. It was something slower, subtler. You became misaligned with the system. You stopped fitting cleanly into forms and summaries, and systems don't tolerate that for long. I retired early, officially for health reasons, unofficially because I'd stopped being useful in the way they needed. I took my things home, maps, old flashlights, a logbook I'd kept hidden for years. That logbook is thin now, pages missing, not torn out, absent. I don't remember removing them, but I recognize the pattern well enough not to argue with it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tone, not through a radio anymore, just as a pause in the world, a sense that something is checking whether I'm about to speak. This is me speaking. I'm doing it now because classification has limits. It works best when people are alive, employed, and invested in the system that enforces it. I'm none of those things anymore. And because there's one truth that never made it into any folder, regardless of color. What we found wasn't the danger. The danger was how easily it was contained, not by walls or fences, but by procedure, by language, by getting everyone to agree silently that some things were safer if they were never fully understood. If you ever work in a place like that, if you ever see an incident downgraded without explanation, if you ever watch a report change shape between drafts, pay attention to how quickly it happens. That speed is the real warning. Classification isn't about secrets. It's about control over narrative. And once a story is controlled, it no longer needs witnesses. I was present when this was classified. And now, for the first time, I'm present again, without a folder, without a code, without permission. That's all I'm leaving behind.